Hey everybody, this is Earl White, real estate attorney. This week's video, we are going to be talking about inspection waivers. Inspection waivers have been a really big topic, for since COVID hit and the market was getting really hot. And with the limited inventory now, you're starting to see more inspection waivers make their way back in when we had a brief reprieve from it for a little while. So what I'm going to do is break it down into the types of inspection waivers, because sometimes there's a little bit of confusion about what they mean or how they might interact with each other. So if you find this helpful, give it a like and give it a share to someone you think could use it. Okay, so the first thing is that standard waivers. And by what I mean in a standard waiver is that in the attorney review in New Jersey, there are certain waivers that make their way into most deals, whether or not the parties are thinking they've made waivers for inspection. So you usually will see some language in the seller's attorney's rider that says cosmetic items are waived. So that's something visual. You'll see items beyond their useful life that are still functioning. That's pretty standard waiver too. So if a central AC is old and it's still functioning without a defect, but it needs to get replaced, that's normally not something the buyer can object to. If there is a specific concern, then like if there's an item that was recently upgraded and you want to make sure that that doesn't need to be upgraded again, then you have to do a carve out for that. But most items beyond their useful life but not otherwise defective, that's not something the buyer can object to. Need for ongoing maintenance beyond the closing, that's not something normally can be objected to. And the last one that you normally will see in each attorney's rider is that upgrades. So buyer can't ask for something to be defective because the model is not the model is not as good as a model would be by today's standards. So upgrades are not something that you can normally object to. So those are standard waivers. Pretty much, if you take a look at the rider, you're going to see those on every deal. But those standard ones are not normally what we mean by inspection waivers. So these ones I'm going to talk about now are the ones that, colloquially, what people are normally talking about when we're talking about inspection waivers. So the first I'll put into a bucket of types of defects that are being waived. So typically you'll see something along the lines of waiving everything except structural, environmental, or mechanical, or maybe just everything except structural and environmental, or maybe just everything except structural. So, but the big three, everything is, and I'll talk about this one, everything except structural, mechanical, and environmental. So I've talked to my clients a lot of times and they're like, oh, and this language they've signed off on says waive everything except structural, environmental, mechanical. And if you ask them what they're thinking, they're just like, oh, we're not going to be nitpicky, right? Well, that's not really what this is. It's not about nitpicky or not nitpicky. It's about whatever you're going to object to during your inspection contingency has to fit one of these categories of structural, environmental, mechanical. So structural, obviously, foundation, beams supporting the structure, any pillars supporting the structure. So those are obviously structural. And then I think most people would agree that a roof and like a chimney built into the house are structural. And so those are some structural items. Mechanical, that means like mechanical systems. So typical ones for mechanical, anything HVAC, so central AC, water heater, furnaces. Usually most people would agree plumbing items are, so, pipes, plumbing, usually agree those are mechanical systems. And electric, most people would probably agree is, wiring, electric panels, those are mechanical systems too. Last one that you commonly see is environmental defects. Now those are like asbestos, mold, anything radon, anything chemicals or contamination is clearly environmental. Most people would agree. Pests, water seepage into the property, that's environmental as well. So, but again, so reasonable people could differ on these definitions, and there is no case, there is no statute, so basically our people's general understandings of these terms are what is, there could be a difference of opinion, and it's going to be, the persons we're looking at. Like I said, there's categories that everyone would agree to, and there's gray area categories where some people might disagree with the type of, if a certain defect fits that category. So what I like to do in attorney review is to try to limit those gray areas and put like a small definition of each of these waivers into the rider. So you could do mechanical including but not limited to plumbing, HVAC, electric, environmental, including but not limited to, water seepage and pests, anything that people might debate or you think a reasonable person might debate, just put that in the definition. And I've never really had any problems. Never had any problems adding them in that way. And it just makes everyone feel more comfortable that we're not going to have a dispute about what fits there. I mean, it still could happen, but the odds of a dispute are going to go down dramatically if you do spend a little time to define them. And usually it's not a problem, and the seller will sign on to it. So the next type of waiver, I'll call the magnitude of the waiver. So so you'll see structural, environmental, mechanical. Those are types of waivers. Then you also see something like major. I waive every buyer waives all inspection except for major items. And what does that mean? So that's obviously undefined, and usually it's not defined coming into attorney review. So what does major mean? I think that's it's up to the person interpreting the term. So what I like to do is put a financial definition on what major is. So is it greater of repair? Usually the only way I know how to do that is it a repair greater than X amount of money? So $750 or $1,500 or $2,000. So it depends on what we define major to be in the contract. Now, like I always tell my clients on this topic, like, okay, the only way I know how to define it is to put a price point on it. But the downside with doing that is that if you put a price point on it, the seller might counter back and say, well, 1,000 isn't major, it has to be 3,000 or 5,000, and the parties put their head together. The other option for the buyer is you could just leave it vague and just not define it, and not define quote unquote major items. And then in theory, you could have a dispute with people saying things are major and minor. And obviously there'd be no clear guideposts to point to decide that dispute. So if you had an unreasonable party on the other side, if you have a $100,000 deposit in a big purchase and you have an unreasonable party on the other side, and you just have the word major, you could find yourself in a heated dispute. And I've seen that before. So, but if you put the price point on it and you go get a quote from a contractor to support that price point, and then a reasonable seller would not be able to dispute that, at least not as much as they'd be able to dispute just the word major. The next one I'll put is a repair. I'll call it a repair value waiver. This is sort of when you see in the contract that the buyer waives the first $10,000 in inspection defects. And this normally means that there'll be various repairs, and cumulatively, if all the repairs exceed $10,000, or whatever number the parties agree to, if all the repairs exceed that, the buyer can then, once they exceed that threshold, can then begin to raise anything else that comes above that. It can be a little bit awkward because what if you have a bubble item, right? What if you have a $5,000 waiver and you have to replace the central air conditioner that costs $10,000, right? It's kind of a gray area on how to deal with that. I sometimes put language in that, if an item takes it, if a single item takes it beyond the threshold, then the buyer can raise that single item and to eliminate that gray area of what can happen. But usually we won't do that. I'll just explain to my clients that this is a gray area and what do you want to happen if it's one item that puts you over. And usually my client will say, well, I'll just accept a credit for that. I won't raise it, but then I'll ask for a credit for the difference. And usually everyone will get behind that. And so, that's one way to handle that. So those are the four types of the standard waivers, types of defects, magnitude like major, minor, and the waiver of a certain amount of money. Now, obviously, in practice, what you see is these can get mixed together, right? So you see structural, environmental, mechanical, then you'll also see the word major on structural, mechanical, environmental. So now it's not just one or the other. Now you've got them coming together. And then you could also add a repair value waiver of beyond a certain amount. And I've seen all three of these be put into the same rider. To be honest, I try to help define it and explain it. Like when I look at it, I try to help define these things, put reasonable limits, explain to my clients the liability or the risks if you're going along with these waivers. But for the most part, really the realtors kind of hammer this out before attorney review, and the attorneys are just kind of going along with it with perhaps putting some language around it to make it cleaner and clearer and make sure everyone understands it. So guys, hopefully this video was helpful, particularly if you're dealing with inspection waivers regularly. Feel free to reach out for help with any real estate transactions or any questions about how you can approach these inspection waivers. Thank you.